All right. Hi, everybody. It's our CFB Talk 107. We're going to be talking about British college football. My name is Bobak Hyeri, and we're going to be joined by my guests, Tom Snee and Sean Endicott. Some of you may know we like to vary the topics we talk about, not just FBS football, not only at different levels in the United States, but international as well. We've had conversations about college football in Canada, in Japan, and now we're going to talk about what goes on in the United Kingdom. Hey, Tom, have you been able to make it up?
Good evening or afternoon to most of you guys who are listening in the States. Great to thanks for the invite and looking forward to chatting UK college football.
Excellent. All right. Well, hopefully Sean will be up here in a moment. Let's see here. So Tom has been involved in football in the United Kingdom for more than 15 years. He started playing at the University of Huddersfield, where he remains the program's all-time leading wide receiver. He's played 4 different teams in the National League before retiring at 26. Since then, he's had 2 spells coaching at the University of Nottingham, as well as a 2-year period as editor of Double Coverage, which was the UK's leading gridiron publication. He's also a member of the Nottingham Honey Badgers Hall of Fame and is currently assistant head coach at the University of Nottingham's flag football team. Sean has started a flag football team, runs a under-19 tackle football team, is on the University of Nottingham's team staff that includes 2 teams, Gold and Green. We'll probably talk a little bit more in detail about that in a little bit. And he's also on the staff of Great Britain's national team as film coordinator. Tom and Sean, again, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, excellent. So, just to kind of start us off and give folks here a bit of, because we're going to assume most of our audience isn't super familiar with football in the United Kingdom. So let's talk, how did it develop? Where did it come from? Where did the interest start on the British Isles?
So really the interest in the sport picked up in the 80s. So, there were times in US military bases, sort of since the Second World War, really, US military bases in the UK where tackle football was played. But realistically, in terms of the game indigenously in the UK, that kind of really took off in the 1980s. Just a few teams to start off with, and certainly in the University League, I think it started in 1985, 86. There are only sort of 3 or 4 teams playing at that time. But in terms of the university game in the UK, that's kind of really developed over the last, I would say, 15 years or so. So just to go back to that kind of mid-80s and into the 90s, basically, teams that were quote-unquote representing universities were often only really kind of like quite loosely associated with those sort of academic institutions, as it were. And a lot of the time they didn't have any kind of support or funding from the universities at all. It was even the case where a lot of universities had kind of merged teams. So to use Nottingham as an example, there was one team in Nottingham which covered the 2 universities. So the big catalyst for growth in the university game in the UK was 2007, 2008, when the game sort of began to fall under the jurisdiction of the British American Football Association. So I guess the equivalent of, if you're a soccer follower, the FA, the Football Association. They kind of took control of the way the league worked, and then wanted it to become part and receive recognition from BUCS, which is the British University and College Sport. So essentially, again, an association, I guess, loosely equivalent to the NCAA in the States. So I guess what that meant then was that with that recognition, which they eventually achieved in 2012, a lot of the universities started taking the sport seriously. A lot of the athletic unions that kind of run the sports at the universities began to support American football as we know it over here, the same way they support soccer and athletics and all the other mainstream sports. And the league has basically doubled in size since that happened. So there's just over 80 teams now. So it's kind of plateaued, because I think we're kind of at the level now, and Sean may disagree with me on this, but I think we're probably at a level now where any university or academic institution that's kind of the size that could support an American football team has probably already got one. So I think we're kind of plateauing at around, I think it's 82 teams that are competing this season.
Wow. So there's over 80, basically university or college football teams. I always hesitate to say college internationally, because I know, for example, in Britain, in the Commonwealth, college is a fuzzy name that could mean high school-ish as well.
Yeah, that's right.
But there's over 80 teams. I didn't realize there were that many.
It's been a huge amount of growth, and I know, as I say, Sean's been involved with the game similar amount of time as I, and I'm sure he'll remember, the years when we first started playing, and it was very, very amateurish in comparison to how it is now, certainly at the top levels.
Yeah, Sean, I'd love to hear your impressions on that.
Yeah, first, Tom, that's a great run through of the history of it. American football in the UK has kind of had a few different peaks, the 80s, and then it kind of lulled a bit. And if you talk to the old hats in the UK, some of the older coaches, they'll always talk about the glory days of the Budweiser League and when there was money in American football in the UK. And so it was a long journey back to where we are now. But as Tom said, there's over 80 teams here in the UK. And then that's just university teams. Mind you, there's also adult teams in the, independent, under 19, under 17, women's flag, etc. But specifically referring to university, it's at a growing level right now where the upper tier starts really seeing elite play. And we've now actually seen university players go directly from university sport into either colleges in the US, NCAA or other levels, and then also even the NFL. So the University of Nottingham had a player, AO, played for us, came here to be a lawyer, and it turned out he was an NFL level player. So he's now on the practice squad for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I played for us for, I think, a year and some change. Some other universities have had similar stories as well in the Midlands, Loughborough with Deo as well. Effie Obada for the Washington Commanders. He came not from a university team, but from an adult team down in London, the London Warriors. And so we're starting to see that upper tier where they can go through that different programs and that sort of thing and see higher success.
That's really an interesting point. I mean, it takes time to develop kind of that sort of football machine of, training and the game of all the other players being to a certain level. You mentioned the 1980s, and I remember, I'm old enough to remember the World League of American Football, with the London Monarchs and the Scottish Claymores, and I think it became NFL Europe towards the end. So was that a moment where football in Britain was kind of becoming more popular?
I think from my observations of it, and I'm probably dating myself a little bit to say that I don't remember too much of certainly the World League of American Football days. It was more NFL Europe when I was sort of starting to watch the game growing up. And I'm sure anyone who's played the sport in the UK before I did may correct me on this, but my impression of those times were that a lot of the interest and sponsorship and funding towards American football in the UK was directed towards those two teams, whereas previously, as Sean mentioned, in the 80s and the kind of the Budweiser leagues, the funding was more evenly split across a number of teams, and there was a kind of a level of professionalism in the game in the UK which hasn't really been achieved on a wider scale since then. But certainly, to Sean's point about the top level of university sport, of university American football in particular, we had the final of BUCS last season, the national championship game between UWE and the University of Nottingham, and that has been widely acclaimed as one of the best games of American football that's ever been played in this country. The quality of athlete on show, the quality of coaching on show, the quality of facilities on show, just really put the sport in this country in the best possible light. And I'd highly recommend anybody who's interested to search that out on the BUCS YouTube channel, the National Championship for American Football from earlier this year. It was a very good game. I'm not going to spoil it for anyone by telling you who won.
From your observations over the years, what has led to that development of that level of high play?
I think that there's a variety of factors. A big part of it is that I think a bit of a generational gap. Younger people in the UK are more open to kind of these more Americanized things in my experience. I mean, obviously, I'm going to have a bias. I am American. And so I run into people talking about America a lot more than the average person in the UK. I'd probably get asked where I'm from 3 to 5 times a week. And so obviously that skews things a bit. But when I go into schools and I do sessions for American football, like I'll go into what in America we would call middle schools, high schools, that sort of thing. The kids are more interested. It's something new. They've seen it on TV. Maybe they've been or seen to an NFL game in London. And they're more open to it, as you've seen with the advent of streaming and international game pass in the case of the NFL, and college football having different streaming options, you can watch pretty much anyone from anywhere if you have the right tools and you're willing to spend a few dollars or pounds. And so we've seen that interest go up globally. It's pretty normal. I always ask them, who's ever seen American football before? It's always at least half. But every once in a while, there'll be a guy who signs up for a session. You say, or they'll come to one of my teams or the university teams or whatever, say, I watch this, or I'm a big whatever fan. And it's always kind of fun to see which teams they support, because obviously none of them are here. So it's, you'll find a Raiders fan and then a Packers fan and a Commanders fan, all in the middle of Nottingham, England, as you would. And so I think that's been a big part of the interest. And then I think there's a growing swell of youth teams as well that I would love to see more young people involved in the game. But the efforts that I've seen across the cadet, youth, under 19, and university games has really helped as well. They really get people involved.
I would say as well, to feed on from that point there, Sean, it was certainly when I started playing, it was a rarity for anybody to have played the sport very much before university. The amount of teams at that kind of level below university, because it was minimal, and for most people, it is still the case that, on university teams, most people's first exposure to the sport in terms of playing it, they will naturally have, seen some NFL most of the time, but their first exposure to playing the game is when they first go to university at the age of 18, 19, which, in terms of the skill level that some of these players end up with when they leave university, is fairly remarkable that, you start the sport that you'd never played before at 18, 19, and by the time you're leaving university at 22, 23, you're at a level where you can, the better ones can be competing for spots in the UK senior league and even beyond, in the semi-pro leagues in Europe. So I would say, in terms of the development of the university game in particular, the joining BUCS, or the move to join BUCS, which happened in sort of from 2007 onwards, it became official in 2012 from the 2012-13 season. That has massively increased the amount of funding that not all teams, but a number of teams have been able to receive from their universities, and the support they receive from their universities. I know that when I first coached the University of Nottingham back in just before that the year before that, they had pretty decent support from the university, but nowhere near the level of access to the high quality facilities they have now. When I've coached the team in the last couple of years, they have access to the high performance zone, which is, they have access to scholarships, which is a whole new level of thing in the UK to have scholarships to play. American football is, when I first played 15 years ago, the idea that you would choose a university based on what kind of football program they offer was alien. Whereas now, the universities at that competing at that top end are able to offer high quality education, but also, great access to sporting facilities and the opportunity to really, you can take this game as that kind of mantra that you can take this game as far as you want to go with it.
That's utterly fascinating. It's so funny. I'm taking our conversation kind of more of a gradual approach, but I really want to dive deep into a lot of what you just said about the college game. That I had no idea there were scholarships at this point. Before we kind of dive more into sort of the specifics in British college football, one thing that I was curious about: how successful in your mind have these international series games in London been for spreading interest? Because even in the United States, we always hear about the fabled eventual NFL franchise in London. Whether it materializes is a whole other point. Although, hearing what you're saying and this development over the last decade or so at the lower levels, I mean, that's where the interest comes from. I mean, there's many analogies of that. But what are your thoughts on how that has affected interest in Great Britain?
I think it's helped quite a bit. The interesting thing with the international games is that they sell out almost instantly. Well, we have group chats for all the, as everybody does, with all your teams and social clubs. And we kind of coordinate, everyone try to get tickets, and then whoever gets in first, you just buy them, and then we'll sort out payment, even it out later, because they're so popular. And so with that, you see a growing interest in American football. It's a bit of a spectacle because it's a non-traditional sport in the UK, but it's at these world-class stadiums, a Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, Wembley, obviously very historic. So it's not like it's some piddly dink, little hole in the wall. I mean, this is an international spectacle on the biggest networks here in the UK with the different sports, cable networks, satellite, whatever streaming services pick it up. And so I think it helps a lot in terms of exposure to the game. I'm not sure that the intention is necessarily to translate people into players as much as it's to translate them into viewers. Obviously the NFL is interested in reaching a new viewership, but I think that as coaches, we've received almost what I would call the ancillary side benefit of most young people now are at least tangentially aware of the NFL and the international series. And so that really helps when it comes to recruitment, because they've seen it before, they see highlight reels, and then some of them say, hey, I want to get involved. I mean, that's going back to Ao, who I mentioned earlier, when he saw, I think, running back highlights and then said, oh, I think I could do that. And he was a really high level soccer player or football, depending on where you're from. And I think he saw some highlights and that kind of spurred that interest. And so that's what I would say is I'd imagine the NFL is probably gearing more towards an audience idea, but we get the benefit of so many people seeing these games.
Going back to just sort of the macro level organization of football in Britain. So you have, the British American Football Association, the British Universities American Football League, and the British Universities and College Sport, BUCS, which we've talked about. How do they interrelate? Is that, and because that was one thing when we started to sort of add elements of British university football on our CFB, it was actually a little bit difficult for us to do some research and figure out how those three relate. I have a good idea now, but could you explain for our audience how that sort of organizes itself?
Yeah, we'll try our best. It can get a little bit muddy and a little bit confusing. So BAFA, the British American Football Association, they essentially oversee all American football played in the UK. They're the national association, and from then they have offshoots such as the Coaches Association, the Referees Association. So they are the overall arbiter of American football in the UK. That feeds down to, they work closely with, I believe this is the situation, Sean, you might be able to correct me on this, but they work quite closely with BUCS on how the league is administrated. So they essentially administrate the Universities League, but BUCS has a lot of input in terms of how the regional division's broken down, how and most importantly, how the kind of structure of overall standings are broken down. Because the thing with the whole kind of, the benefit of being part of BUCS is that you can win BUCS points for your university. So this is essentially a scoring system that's held across all sports that are played under the BUCS banner. So you'll get, American football will, if you win the national championship, not only do you have the honor of winning the national championship, you also earn X amount of BUCS points for your university. And this is kind of, universities are ranked across all sports. So that's kind of how it works on a kind of, as I say, more of a macro type level. You've got the 82 teams, I believe it is, or 80 universities with 82 teams. And they sort of split into three tiers: the Premier Division, which is again then regionally split north and south, and then the lower tiers. And basically the aim of the lower tiers is to get yourself promoted. So we have promotion and relegation, very much like there is in soccer, but obviously very different to the way the American college system works, or American sports systems generally work. We have promotion and relegation, and the aim is, while it's great to win that level's national championship, the Division 2 national championship, the aim overall is to get yourself promoted all the way up to the Premier Division tier, where you can play for the big points, you play against the biggest and the best teams, you play against the best athletes, and you have more recruiting power by saying you have that exposure of playing at the top level.
Yeah, so as you said, 80 teams. So just to get a little bit diving deeper into that structure of how the college teams, all those 80 teams are divided up. So are there conferences within the divisions, and how many divisions are there?
So there are tiers. And they are especially to someone coming from an American background, somewhat confusingly named because they're not directly correlated between the number they have and the number they are. The Premiership division has, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, it's 10 teams at a time. And so they're the 10 highest ranked university teams in the UK. Every year, the Premiership is split into North and South. And then the bottom 2 teams are relegated to Division 1. And then the top 8 teams stay in the Premiership from year to year. And so that's the main top 10, which, so for example, like the University of Nottingham was promoted a few years back into the Premiership and then has stayed there since then. Then you have Division 1, which is confusingly the second division. As I said, these are not always as straightforward as you may think. And so you have Division 1 is split into more conferences because you have, I think they're actually called divisions at that level. So you have like the Midlands division, which will have teams in the middle of England. And then you'll have the Northern one and the Southern one. And then Division 2, which again is confusingly the third division, is split similarly geographically. The Premiership is a little less geographic because there's so few teams. So, for example, the University of Nottingham plays against Stirling, which is in Scotland. So it's roughly a 7 or 8 hour drive to get up there, which is a pretty long trip for a 3-hour contact sport. But the lower you get, the more regional they end up. So not always necessarily straight, regional, but they get more regional as you get more teams.
That makes sense. One of the things that sort of struck me as we were talking about this were the director points. And that's something I think American college fans can understand because there's the Learfield Directors Cup that's awarded to, the athletic program that has the most points across all sports. Of course, the one in the United States is quite, well, I wouldn't say biased, but some schools offer just a boatload of programs and others don't. So for, I think, like 15 years or more, it was Stanford winning year after year after year, not because of the football team, because of every other sport they field. And then I think Texas has now taken the lead, but it's basically like, Stanford, Texas, UCLA, USC, and like a couple other schools constantly in that top. So when you're saying director points, I was also curious, do they increase by, I guess, the tier level that the team is on? Does a premier level team earn potentially more director points than a division? And how does that work? I mean, it's a fascinating concept. I never thought of team moving up in the, up to a higher tier or division, and then somehow their wins are more powerful to earning their university a director's cup.
Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly on the mathematics behind how it breaks down, but certainly, the higher up you go, essentially, the more points your victories and your end position is worth at the end of the season. And it's interesting that you made the point about sort of Stanford there and not being the most successful because of their football team. It's very similar in the UK in that Loughborough tends to win. I don't know the exact stats, but I know they've won the overall BUCS championship across all sports a heck of a lot of times over the last couple of decades, almost purely because of the quality of their athletics program. They basically attract the vast majority of GB level athletes that are looking to go to the Olympics. A lot of them will attend Loughborough University for the quality of the athletics facilities there. But in terms of speaking from my experience at the University of Nottingham, I know that last year in particular, the universities run a lot of teams very close overall. A lot of other universities very close overall, and the American football program was a big difference maker in that sense. I've just had a message from one of our fellow coaches who is a Loughborough. He's a Loughborough alumni, and he's just said we're undefeated. So it sounds like they've won absolutely every single BUCS championship there is to go overall. But they definitely haven't won the American football one for a couple of years.
I will say on top of that, I believe, but please understand, I don't deal with the BUCS points. I just try to win them. But I believe that being in the Premiership at all is worth more BUCS points than even, I think, winning a lower division. It's at least similar levels. I could probably get future stats on that. If we talk more I could, I speak with the people who run the sports departments at our University of Nottingham, but it is weighted pretty heavily. And to some extent, I could see arguments to both sides because it's harder to work with, within your space to move up, but also being the number, let's say 4 team in the country or the number 2 team in the country, there is an argument to be made that it's more successful to be number 2 overall than be number 12 overall or number 11, even if number 11 won a lower division. I'll also highlight that in university space, BUCS points they're distributed both to team sports and individual sports. And so, for example, the University of Nottingham is really good at table tennis. They have some of the best table tennis players in the world. I think they actually have some Olympians on their team. And so obviously they earn some points. And so you'll get to a point where an individual swimmer or an individual table tennis player will earn as many points as an entire basketball team or volleyball team, water polo team winning their respective championships. And so you get kind of universities that focus on different things. Obviously, they all focus heavily on getting more sport participation and more wins. But like you might see a team sport university, and then they can say, "Oh, we're number 1 in team sports." And then, as Tom mentioned, Loughborough, in addition to, they obviously have team sports as well, but they also have really good individual sports. So you might see kind of these upper tier teams, Durham, Nottingham, Loughborough, with sport, and they're going to specialize in different areas.
That makes sense. Speaking of another level of this, and it's something that I know it exists in the USA, but is a little less familiar. How does the national team work?
So there are several national teams at different age brackets. Ultimately, so I'm trying to think numbers wise. There's an under 17 flag team, contact team rather, under 17, under 19, and then there's GB men's and GB women's. Now, the GB women's team, they just won a massive victory against Canada, and then they went toe-to-toe and were in a very close matchup against the United States, which I think I can be as bold to say that competing with the United States in a sport called American football is quite the accomplishment, even if the final scoreboard did tilt in the USA's favor. And then the men's team just played in Italy a couple weeks ago, who I believe are the reigning European champions. And they lost by, I want to say 6 to them. I think it was 27-21, but I had to check the final score on that, but it was within a touchdown. So the national teams are generally made up of the best players in the United Kingdom that go through a trial process. Right now, the GB men's team is headed up by Jason Scott, who Dom and I know very well because he's also the head coach of the University of Nottingham. And so Jason's staff consists of coaches from throughout the UK, all the way up into Scotland and all the way down south to London and below, in terms of London and below geographically, not in terms of prestige, of course. And so you have these great coaches from all throughout the country, and then you get recommendations from teams for players that kind of say, hey, this person's a trial, and then there's a big trial, and then as you probably are familiar with most trial processes, it kind of gets whittled down to a smaller roster, then a smaller roster, and then there's a kind of a standing GB squad that's larger than a game day squad, and then they pick the final 45 for actual game days closer to specific games. And that's the general process of how they get a GB team.
That's fascinating. I know you're on the staff doing a lot of the film, correct?
Yeah, so I filmed for the Great Britain national team. We have we're quite spoiled. We have pole-mounted cameras that I can control from a heated office that's next to the field, and I can simultaneously film like from the end zone and from the sideline at once, and I can control both cameras remotely. I can do segments. I can intercut the film together so you can watch the same play from multiple angles. And while to our American audience, you might say, oh, that's normal. I had that at college or I had that at high school. I can assure you that it's really quite the privilege to be able to be involved with those facilities and to be able to film that. And every time because I do filming, I'm officially on the GB men's staff, but because I live 8 minutes from the ground where a lot of events are held, I have filmed individual sessions for GB Women's, GB Under 19, GB Under 17. And they all go there and they say, oh man, this film's incredible. I can't believe it. I say, yeah, I get fun toys to play with. I'm a tech journalist for a living, so I'm a sucker for gadgets and gizmos. And so it's really fun to get the film, but more importantly, it really helps them improve. The GB men's practices, we normally have, because people are traveling so far, we'll have practices throughout the year. And you'll bring in, everyone will come in, they'll train for a few hours in the morning, filmed, and then over lunch, they'll study the game film and then make adjustments in the second half of the day as well.
So just as a quick station ID, you're all listening to our CFB Talk 107. We're talking British college football with Sean Endicott and Tom Snee, both of which are involved both at the coaching and commentating level. I'm sure all of you can tell that because this is an intriguing conversation. I'm enjoying every second of it. Now I would like to just kind of dive a little more into the college structure. And we've touched on it quite a bit, but I wanted to put a little more focus on sort of the logistics of fielding a team. And first of all, you touched on this a bit. So how do the teams fit into the university structure now? Because I was under the impression they might be clubs. I know some countries that offer college sports will make it a club level, or sometimes they'll be under sort of an overarching athletic department. How is it structured typically in Britain?
There's it does vary from university to university. I know certainly within the University of Nottingham, the clubs that fall under the sports that are recognised by BUCS are very much, while they are run by a committee that is essentially members of the club. So, the University of Nottingham, for example, our president is also our free safety, or strong safety. So, there's definitely an element of it being run at a certain level by the members of the team. In terms of bringing in in terms of requesting funding for equipment or what have you. But there's certainly to use the University of Nottingham as an example, there's a very strong, a very large coaching staff there that is able to lean on its years of kind of experience to help guide the committee along, help them recognise what they need to do in terms of asking for support. But it does vary, and you will go to universities that. Certainly to use the University of Nottingham's green team as an example, while the green team is the kind of the equivalent of, I guess, the US equivalent will be a junior varsity team, I would say. It's a second team essentially, which plays in in Division 2, so the third tier. They will come up against teams that are not as fortunate in terms of the amount of support that they get from their university. And, they don't necessarily have a large playing roster or a large coaching staff. So you do get to, certainly with Nottingham, you get to see kind of both sides of the coin in terms of, the way that the university structure works in the UK.
So you touched on this earlier. Are there scholarships at some levels here? Are they sort of academic scholarships, but in a way leaning towards athletes, or are these overt athletic scholarships?
Oh, they don't have to do backdoor stuff. They can admit that they're for athletics here. I
was like, because I can't help but think of the Ivy League or the Pioneer Football League, where it's like there's no scholarships, but then you'll talk to a coach and be like, but we do have plenty of academic aid.
That's
got it. Wink, wink.
That might occasionally happen, but the people that get recruited to be scholars, they're open about what it is. I will point out it's almost never a full scholarship. It does depend on the university, and it does depend on the specific player. And I obviously won't go into specific individuals on what they did or didn't receive. I don't think that's appropriate. But what I will say is that some players will receive a partial scholarship, and some will receive, more benefits. I don't know. I honestly couldn't tell you if that many get full rides for American football. And I would have to double check that. I don't know any personally, but I also don't go around asking people their finances too much. What I will say is that the scholarships are a bit more common in other sports, as you might predict, when you can win the same amount of BUCS points getting a table tennis medal as winning an entire American football season, and you only have one scholarship. Who are you going to give it to? You're going to find the best table tennis player you can. And that's a good thing. I mean, I think it's great that the universities have these wonderful athletes, and whether it be track and field, lifting, rowing, athletics, whatever. But if you were a university and you only had the budget for one, you're probably going to lean a bit towards more someone that can deliver more. And then you can funnel that into other sports, almost the opposite of what you would see in the US, where the American football teams and at some schools, the basketball teams end up trickling down into the other sports. Sometimes you get a situation where individual sports are so successful that the funding and benefits can then trickle into team sports.
I would say as well, to use, I'll keep going back to Nottingham as an example. It's the one I'm sort of know most intimately. It's not necessarily all about scholarships as well. It's about making and sort of creating that high quality environment that players, that even if they aren't going to come to the university on a scholarship, they look at the football program and go, hey, you know what, I've played some youth football, or I've played junior football. I want to be part of that. And I think the thing Nottingham in particular benefits from is that it's a great university academically as well. So not only are you attracting people that want to play sport at the university, you're also attracting those people that really want to make sure that they're getting the best academics out of their time at university. Because the reality of it is there is only a very, very, very small percentage of people that attend university in the UK and play American football. There's only a very small percentage, a minuscule percentage of those that are going to end up making a living out of playing American football. So the main thing they want to come to the University of Nottingham, and they want to become a doctor, or they want to become a lawyer, or they want to get that degree in biosciences. That's what they're here for in the UK. So that is something the University of Nottingham benefits from. Is that high quality of education, alongside as the facilities that Sean mentioned earlier. I don't want this to turn into an advert for the University of Nottingham, but equally, if anybody's looking to come over, drop me a DM.
If I can piggyback on what Tom said, one thing that's a bit different in the university space in the UK is undergraduate degrees are often only for 3 years, and master's degrees are often for 1. And then PhDs can obviously vary and be rather lengthy. And so what you'll see at a variety of universities is someone who played either in America at some level, or maybe in the UK at a high level, then switch universities for like a 1-year master's degree, or maybe their PhD. And eligibility in the UK is longer. So in the US, you couldn't play for Wisconsin for 4 years and then say, oh, now I want to go get a master's degree at, Fordham, or now I want to go to Harvard or Duke or Stanford or whatever. You run out of eligibility. In the UK, if you're a student and you are doing enough credit hours, you play till you die if you felt like it. And heck, I've known people who basically did. You go there and they're 30-something years old and they've been playing university ball for 8, 9, 10 years. And that's fine because they're getting an education, right? That's really what they're ultimately there for. And so you will see that a bit more. People will transfer to another university and then get another degree and get to keep playing.
Wow. That's an interesting way of looking at it, but it makes sense when you think about especially how university sports kind of fit into the ecosystem of higher education in Great Britain. So one thing this leads to is, how do you typically recruit players?
So
I think go ahead, Tom.
Okay, sorry. So I would say, using UON as an example, there's a well-oiled machine behind it. This is not, the success that UON's had over the last few years hasn't happened by accident. There's a high quality coaching staff, and I'm not including myself as part of that, but there's a great high quality coaching staff, and they've had a strategy over the last few years of making sure that we are appealing to players. And it's not just an exclusive thing for the University of Nottingham. I know that several universities do this, but we're offering kind of almost open days and talent identification days for guys that are 15, 16 years old playing youth football. They get the opportunity to come to Nottingham, for a weekend and, practice on our field and have a look at the facilities and just see what it's like to be part of the setup. So when they're making their decisions when it comes to what A levels they're doing, which is the the qualifications they need to get into university, they can go, hey, you know what, I'm going to aim high because I really want to get into the University of Nottingham because I'd love to be a lawyer and I'd also love to play football on a 3G field, then I get great game film. So that, it's a well-oiled machine in Nottingham, but I would say that most universities, certainly in the lower tiers, as I mentioned earlier, they're bringing guys in that are playing the sport for the first time at 18. So I know that, to use myself as an example, when I went to the University of Huddersfield, I was a cricket player and I'd done a bit of athletics. So I was desperate to get involved with the cricket team and do a bit of track and field. University of Huddersfield, not well known for its track and field or its cricket. So when I went to essentially my orientation, I guess is the way you would describe it in US terms, of the Freshers' Fair, all of the sports and societies were laid out there in the sports hall at Huddersfield. It's all alphabetically laid out. I walked in, I looked to my left, I saw American football, which was the first sport alphabetically that was available to me. And I thought, hey, you know what? I enjoy watching the NFL. I can run a bit, I can catch a bit. Maybe I'll just try it out, see if I can play some wide receiver. And that, I think, that sort of origin story is fairly typical for the way that the vast majority of universities in the UK still recruit. Say, to use Nottingham as an example, it's a completely different world to some of those teams that are in the lower tiers. As you know, it's a sort of a condensed version of, I guess, what you have in the States. You'll have your major college programs that are out there throwing scholarships around left, right, and centre. They can pick the creme de la creme of high school athletes. And then you get, towards the lower end, and you get, lower divisions of the NCAA. You're looking at sort of Div 2 and JUCO. You're picking up what's left almost. And while that entry level is obviously a lot higher in the States, it's the equivalent to that in the UK.
If I could tag on that as well, I think what's so interesting is because of the nature of recruitment in the UK for American football, teams can dramatically shift for better or for worse within a few years. And so, yes, obviously, in terms of experienced players, they're the methods we talked about before. On the higher level tier, the Premiership teams they're looking for scholars, maybe a couple from America. Marcus Mariota's little brother plays in the UK, Matt Mariota. I think he plays for Leeds Beckett. And I don't know if he's a scholar or not. But the point is you can recruit, experienced people. And then there's people who played before, under 19 programs. Maybe they played. University of Nottingham has someone who played in Ireland, as well as people that have played at various programs throughout England and that sort of thing. But I would say the meat and potatoes of the vast majority of teams in the UK are people who did exactly what Tom did, which is they walked up to an event. And I went to the University of Maryland before I came over here. And I went to the University of Maryland, and they had a booth, but it wasn't for all the sports teams. It was for, all the societies, where the film society, where the, different religious groups would have their groups. You'd have the anime club, juggling society. And it's almost like that, but for sports, maybe like you'd see a little bit at high school. And so that's the meat and potatoes of it. And sometimes you get really lucky. Now I used to play and coach for a different university. Now they're big rivals of where I currently am, but I'd be remiss if I didn't tell this story. I coached offensive line at Nottingham Trent University. And one year we had 5 players who were 6'3" or taller, and 4 of them were over 300 pounds. 2 of them went on to play in Germany, and one of them had played for the Ireland national team. And every single one of them was there just for like a degree. Like, it wasn't like they called these guys up and recruited them. It was just, I happened to have an offensive line that was that big and that talented. I don't want to say by luck, because like some of them have heard about the program before, but it was mostly just people who showed up. And then someone was like, you're a big person. Can you shove other people? Come play American football. I coached a guy who was 6'8", 380 pounds. He was just recruited to be, he was there on like a business degree. So that's the meat and potatoes of most recruits in the university scene here. Just you see if you get recruited and then you try it out.
The classic story that we always used to joke about is that you'd walk around campus with a football in hand and you throw it at someone. If they caught it, you'd go, right, come on, try it out. So it really was that level. I mean, I would say I think recruiting methods have maybe developed ever so slightly since 2007. But yeah, it is, as Sean said, your regular guys are just people that walk up and give the sport a go.
Now I'm imagining somebody walking around on the hallowed halls of Oxford University, to Christchurch, Pembroke, Wadham, and just chucking a football at random people and seeing if they catch it, only to find out they're a professor or something.
Hey, look, if you were walking around campus in my shoes and you saw someone who was like 6'5", 300 pounds, you best be sure you talk to that person. It's like in high school. Yeah, everybody knows that high school coach walked up to a kid and said, "Oh, you play football?" And the kid goes, "No, I don't like football." And he goes, "You play football. You play football. You could be a good linebacker. Come on down. Practice at 3:00. That's kind of what we do here sometimes. We had a guy join like last week, and I turned to one of my tight ends and said, you recruited that guy? And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Where the heck did you find this guy? He's like, there just aren't people that large. Like, how did he not know about us?" And that happens quite a bit.
Oh, goodness. So where do the coaches tend to come from?
I would say coaches generally come from the playing ranks. I mean, occasionally you get a coach that's not played before, but most of us are, I always tell my players, particularly the under-19 ones who still have so much of a career ahead of them, I say, play until your body tells you can't anymore, and your knees don't, work or whatever, and then come coach for you. And that actually happens quite a bit. So and then when you become a head coach somewhere, you start calling up your friends and you say, "Hey, you were always a really good linebacker. Would you like to come coach linebackers?" And the culture in the UK, almost all coaches are volunteer, just across the board. There are very few coaches that get paid, almost none that can do it full time. And so it's like you're a community basketball coach. Like when I played, Gaithersburg, Maryland basketball league for 10-year-olds, and it was just some dude who was coaching. It's kind of like that here, except the dude happens to be someone who played a fully fledged contact sport. And then you build networks of coaches and you go from there. I think, Tom, you've probably had similar experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you don't necessarily. The thing is, in the UK, the level of coaching, I would say, and I'm going to be very careful how I word this, the level of coaching varies greatly across the divisions, and that applies not just in university football, but also in senior football as well. I've been fairly fortunate in my career to have been surrounded by some really good ones. But you do hear the odd horror story here and there. So it's the reality of it is, as Sean said, it's a volunteer thing, and clubs and teams will very rarely turn away volunteers. But the level of coaching is now, and it's a trickle through of the quality of play, but the level of coaching in it is night and day to what it was when certainly when I played, which is, we're going back, getting off 10 years now since I retired. The quality of coaching across the board is so much better, and that's just making for a much better product of American football. As I say, the Premier League of American football, in terms of the BUCS Premier League, is by far and away as good as it's ever been. And I'm sure some old timers will tap me on the shoulder with their walking stick to say it was better in the 80s, but it definitely was not. The level of play that we've seen over the last couple of seasons in that Premier League is really good. And you're getting guys that come over from the States that have played, and you're getting guys that have played, some guys that have played NCAA Div 1 football, and they're coming over, and they are saying the standards even better than we expected it to be. So yeah, it's the levels are going up all the time, and that is across coaches, players, and dare I say it, referees. Although I'll probably get in a bit of trouble for saying that.
I would also add that high tides raise all ships, right? And so I'll take my University of Nottingham hat off for a second. I'm the head coach of a under-17 flag team, and then an under-19 tackle team. The Nottingham Arrows are the flag, Nottingham Caesars for tackle. And obviously, with an age group of 16 to 19-year-olds, a lot of them are interested in universities. And so we will recommend, I always tell the lads, I say, find a university that fits you first, your degree, the experience, if it's near family, or in some cases, if it's far away from family, if that's what you prefer. and then find the team later. And so I end up sending a lot of guys out to other universities. And look, they don't have to listen to me. I'm just saying, I'm sending out the wrong phrase. I see a lot of our guys go to other universities where you kind of almost say, oh, but also they're good unis here. I happen to be on the university staff here, and you're one of the best players in the country. But obviously, I encourage them to find a degree that fits their experience. And that ultimately is an investment in the sport, right? When you have good under 17 teams, when you have good under 19 teams, and then they go to universities and then they play for adult teams, no matter where they end up, it makes American football better in the United Kingdom, which ultimately helps everyone that's here. And we're rivals on the field, and we yell and holler and cheer and have our big matches and all that stuff. But probably more so than what you see in other regions and maybe even in some other sports, we're a community. I've definitely coached a game in a heated battle, and then afterward, the other team will buy you a pint in the bar. And it's definitely a culture of, yes, we compete on the field, but all of us want the entire sport of American football to be better at every single level.
And I would say that's also borne out in, again, some of the American players that we've had come over. I would say, for the ones that I've dealt with, to a man, they have been brought over not just because they, wanted to extend their football career or get, a great MBA or what have you. They have come over here with a view to improving the game globally and doing that, for themselves in the UK. I'll use, Josh Greaves was our starting quarterback last year for the University of Nottingham, who, he came over, we quarterback at Oxy College in California, I believe, in the States.
Yeah, it's in LA.
Yeah, over in LA, so just down the road from where he's from. And he came over, and the biggest thing I can say about him, despite the fact he was a fantastic football player, he's gone over to play professionally in Denmark and won the Mermaid Bowl, which is the national championship in Denmark. The one thing I would say about him is, just a fantastic person who was completely committed to elevating the level of football in the UK. And you will see players that just practice with him twice a week, even the guys that are on the green team, that only really were almost, just maybe caught one or two passes from him, just being around him, listening to the way he talked about the game, listening to the way that he broke a defense down. It's made such a huge difference, and he's just one player that's making that difference. So, there's a big debate in the UK about the arms race in terms of, scholarships and getting guys through the door that are going to improve the top teams. But, when they've got the right mindset in terms of developing the game over here, they're worth their weight in gold.
So football requires a lot of equipment. How do teams typically obtain them? Does a school fund it?
That depends somewhat based on the team. You occasionally get sponsors and that sort of thing to help out. It's often done through universities, and that's one of the bigger challenges, to be honest with you. Whether you're a small team trying to kit up a whole team, which is a challenge in itself, or you're a big team and then you have to find 100 helmets. It's quite the challenge. But I would say it's a largely connected to the universities themselves, and they invest in it. And then to some extent, there's some sponsorships and some other aids in that area.
Yeah, and there's a lot of from what we see with quite a few teams is that there's kind of almost a sort of symbiotic relationship with a local senior team, for example. So, a team that plays in the National League, a lot of universities will naturally, because of geography and the fact that it's the volunteers, a lot of universities will have a similar coaching staff to those that are coaching the senior league. So they'll often be the opportunity to kind of do a bit of a kit exchange and, realize that we're 6 helmets down for this weekend. Can we borrow it from the local team? I did spot, just in terms of uniforms, for example, I did spot earlier this week, actually, I can't remember which team it was that I saw, but I saw they were wearing the road jersey of the local senior team. So they'd obviously had to, they'd not had a road jersey that didn't clash with the colour of the team that they were playing against. So they've had to borrow kit in that sense. So, it is a huge, we don't beat around the bush. It's a huge expense. And we do kind of encourage players that if they decide, if they played the game for a year, they come into their freshman year at university. They played the game for a year. They decide they want to continue playing. We do kind of actively encourage those guys to, hey, when your student loan drops, maybe don't spend so much on a flat screen TV for your halls or pints at the pub. Maybe get yourself a really good helmet that's going to protect your brain. So there's an element of asking for a little bit of personal responsibility from the players, but generally most teams do their very best by begging, borrowing, and stealing to make sure that they can kit up the players they need on game day.
It is a contact sport, so how do you guys handle the inevitable injuries?
I actually think that this is a strength in the UK game. I don't want to get into any political discussions. This isn't the forum for that, but the bottom line is that there is nationalized health services in the UK. And so if you get injured, you might have to wait a bit. But I tore my knee up playing American football here. I was adults, not university, but I tore 2 ligaments, my meniscus, and dislocated my knee. And I had a bone chip floating around in there at some point that the doctors didn't let me keep, mind you. I wanted to keep the bone chip. They wouldn't let me. But the point is I had surgery here and it was taking care of it. And so you can get personal liability or personal insurance as well. That's a thing that you can get on top of it. And the league is insured. I mean, obviously, if there was an actual issue, that the league does require all players to be registered. All coaches have to be registered. There's required trainings. There's required certifications. But that's in terms of post-game injuries. In terms of on-the-day injuries, every single game has to have certified medic staff. University of Nottingham is pretty blessed with that. For anyone who's in the UK, we have a lot of medical history. The guy who invented the MRI machine used to be a professor here. There's a hospital that's connected to the university, and then there's a lot of sports science courses, medic courses, and that sort of thing. So every game we have great medics, often multiple, and then every team has that. We just had a game yesterday, and there were multiple medics there as well. So it's that's what on the game day, and that includes everything from concussion protocols to seeing if somebody's hurt their shoulder, if they broke their foot or whatever. And I would say, just to add on top of that, because I know this is a hot topic, and we could circle back on this another day. Like, we did baseline concussion testing at the University of Nottingham, where every single player that plays on the field had to go through concussion baselines so that we can compare to them throughout the year. And that's something that we try to focus on. So I actually think out of all the areas that the UK can be really, you struggle, I would actually argue that the medical side of it's probably one of the better ones. Maybe, Tom, you've had a different experience, but at least for me, it's been quite the strength.
No, I completely agree. And as I stopped playing at the age of 26, I ended up with concussions racking up. Ended up with three in a season that ended it for me. But again, even then, that is to have been able to be pulled aside by a medical professional on the day to say, hey, this is you're in a bit of trouble here, mate. Get yourself to hospital. So it's something, again, another area where the game has come on leaps and bounds. But yeah, I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head there, Sean, in terms of it's one area where as a Britball community, as we call ourselves, the British American football community, most of the time we can look at ourselves in terms of medical provision and say, this is something we can be really proud of.
I know we've gone for an hour, but I'd love to keep going a little bit longer if you two have a little bit of time, because there's a bit of subject matter I'd like to cover as well, just in terms of where we are now in the state of the sport.
Well, I'll offer you two things. Well, one, Tom, you can stay as long as you want to. Your lips fall up. I have about 15 minutes at most, and I'm happy to stay on for that and talk to you about anything that we can fit in. And then we'd love to come back as well. If you have a specific topic, I'm sure Tom would love to come back. And we have, if you wanted to speak.
I think we can fit this into 15. I think we can fit this in. And then, yes, absolutely, we'd love to have you.
Yeah, and we can discuss this offline, but former sports scholars, different players and stuff. We can get you in touch with all them as well. So, but yeah, I got some time. Tom, do you have a few minutes?
Yeah, let's do 15 more.
So yeah, what are the current challenges that are really facing teams nowadays in BUCS?
I would say it's numbers. It's really just recruitment. It's hard to find people to play a non-traditional sport that they've never heard of before, or even you're either finding people who haven't heard of it and telling about it, or you're finding people that have seen it but they haven't played it most of the time. And so a lot of teams struggle. I would say numbers and funding are probably the biggest challenges. Lower on the totem pole would be finding coaches. Obviously, there's only so many coaches that can go around. But it's mostly a numbers game. I actually think the passion for it is here, and there is an avenue to succeed, but it's mostly a numbers thing. Tom, would you agree or have any additions to that?
Yeah, I think you've summed it up fairly succinctly there, Sean. I think the main issue, certainly lower down the divisions in the university game, is purely numbers, and often it's numbers of big guys. You know, having a offensive line that can withstand a full season. You know, we've not got, you know, at university level rosters for the vast majority of teams. I would say in terms of registered players, stand at between 40 and 50 in terms of how many players they have kitted on a game day. So, you know, I would use, you know, Division 2 games as an example. We played against Anglia Ruskin University, the game which you guys very, very kindly shared the commentary for, shared the live stream for. And, you know, the guys on their sideline, they were numbering kind of, I think we counted 28, you know, players on the sideline, which is not a huge number. Once you get, you know, if you start in the season with 28, you know, you're inevitably going to get a few guys get a few knocks. You're going to get a few players maybe drop off because they're not getting as much game time as they would like, although you'd say with 28 players, maybe they're all getting as much game time as they can. So yeah, it's a huge challenge, and, you know, that will be the area in which teams will continue to struggle. I would say that, you know, what's something that's exacerbated that has been the pandemic. So basically, when that hit, teams lost a season and a half of, you know, once you've got people getting through the door, you get them bitten by the bug of American football, and you get them there, and you go, right, okay, we've got you in. You've got your first season. You start to play. You've had a great few games. You know, you're really getting into the sport, and then you lose the rest of one season and then the whole of the next one, pretty much. You're bound to get a big drop off of players. So those teams that maybe already had a smaller roster, you know, and I've seen it myself with, you know, the University of Huddersfield, which I attended. You know, they've had to forfeit this season and, you know, step away from the league this season purely because they've got to a stage pre-season where they've looked around and gone, you know what, there's not enough players here for this to be sustainable for us to play an entire season. So it's the numbers is the biggest challenge. I would agree with Sean in that does also, you know, that bleeds into coaching as well. You know, the numbers of coaches that are available is bound to be limited. So yeah, there are challenges in the game, and there is this, I would say, there is this gap between the haves and the have-nots, you know, and it is going to only continue to widen if those teams lower down the chain are still struggling to recruit over the next couple of years.
That makes sense. You know, it's interesting because even before the pandemic, at the D3 level in the United States, you'd occasionally get teams that would run into that where they just lost too many players, and then halfway through the season, I remember Grinnell, and we were talking briefly about Oxy. They both had to forfeit the rest of their seasons. Oxy just ended up dropping football altogether, which was sort of a sad thing because they had a nice tradition there. But where on the positive side of that, because that was where the current challenge is, what can be done to continue to develop and grow university football in Britain?
I would say just get more people involved at a younger age. I've seen such tremendous excitement for the game at younger levels, and it's so exciting to see the under-19 game grow. My under-19 team was we had a really good season last year. We're number 5 in the UK, and then I had friends that were on pretty much all the playoff teams. I knew them, and like the national final there was at a really good level. And so like the London Blitz, they're traditionally, they've always been the best, or I don't know always, but since I've been around, they've been the best under 19 program. And then, Tamworth and some others are up at Gateshead in that top tier as well. And you see that level, and then that goes upwards. So there's definitely a push in the UK to get more people involved in schools, more people involved at a younger level. And then university, I think, it's just canvassing. You know, it's a great experience. Joining an American football team at university changed my life, and for the better. And when I was at my wedding, my wife stood behind an offensive line to throw a bouquet. And I told the offensive line that we better not have any leftovers. And all the people from my team wore team colors for ties. And you get these best men or friends or whatever, your lifelong friends from this, and you get this bond. And we just want to tell people that this is something you can be a part of. And we want to get more people involved in the sport. And I think the more people see this is a fun opportunity, it's not, it's hard work. It is hard work. I've worked harder at American football than, particularly if you consider my physical rehab from knee surgery, maybe than anything else in my life. But it's all been fun. I'm looking right now at a poster of me celebrating my last university game, ironically against the team I now coach. And I'm just there with two fists, celebrating because we won. And that's what I would say to people is, if you want to fix this sport, you got to show what it is, which is just great. It's just wonderful. And that's going to get more people involved than anything else you can do.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Sean, in terms of getting people involved in the game at a young age. You are naturally, by doing that, if you increase the pool of people that are aware of the game or have played the game, from the age of from a primary school age upwards, really, you're naturally increasing the amount of people that head to university with a knowledge of the game already, and you understand the game already. And if their university hasn't got a football program, they're like, well, let's make one. Or, or they will look at a university and, they'll be there making their decisions as they look at their A-level results. And they may well choose a university over another because they have seen that they've got a good football program, or they think, well, you know what? These two schools are excellent academically. I'm balanced on which one I go to, but I'd rather play football for this team than I would for another team. So it's that awareness of the sport from a younger age. And as we talked about the NFL games earlier, and you're right, Sean, in terms of they do, from NFL's perspective, they are very much just about let's get more eyeballs on our product. But in terms of, I use my son as an example. He's 9 now, and he somehow has become a Patriots fan. I'm not sure what mistakes I've made in my life for that to happen. But he's become aware of the sport just through seeing it more on television than he has from knowing that his dad played it. So, it's just that case of getting young people into the sport as early as possible, and then you get that trickle throughout the entire system, whether that's university level or senior team level.
As we kind of wrap up, where are the best places for people to watch UK football and I guess follow the sport on the web or Twitter?
Oh, that's probably the most complicated question you've asked today. To be honest, there really isn't some sort of unified network of it. And most games aren't streamed live. That's not as common. I believe, and I cannot verify this, but at the time I did it, I believe I was actually the first person to ever run a live stream for an American football game from a cell phone, from a mobile phone. I remember Facebook living a game years ago, and people said, this is a revelation. And that was when Facebook Live was pretty new. And so there isn't necessarily a unified thing. What I would say, two-part answer is, I do run the streams for the University of Nottingham games, and so we put that out there. And all but I think one of the games is going to be streamed this year, and I'm the reason it's not is because I'm not there. I'm in America visiting my family. I would say, though, if you want to find American football games to watch, you go on social media and find a group for American football in the UK. There's a bunch of different Facebook groups. I don't want to list one and offend people, but they're, Brit Ball in America. Put that in a search for Facebook, and you'll probably find a few different groups. And whenever streams go up, they get posted pretty quickly. Tom, do you have any tips for finding those? It's kind of hard to find games. So if you have any tips, please tell me.
Well, I'll talk from my experience as formerly editor of Double Coverage, which used to be the site that was the kind of the go-to for American football news in the UK, certainly about British American football. We used to collate all the results, all the live streams. there's not a hell of a lot of that these days, which is probably an area where we fall down a little bit as a sport in the UK. We're terrible at promoting ourselves and terrible about shouting about how well we do. But yeah, I'd strongly recommend. Supporting it, sort of following Sean and myself on Twitter, because if there's ever a University of Nottingham game that's going on stream, we'll sure be tweeting about it. So that's our plug for the University of Nottingham stream.
Love it. Well, thank you guys. This was a really interesting conversation about British college football and all levels of it, its history and the challenges that the teams face, but also kind of the joy. You both are clearly enthusiastic about it, and it's exciting to hear more about what goes on over there. We really appreciate you all taking some time with us.
I appreciate being here. Yeah, we look forward to coming back at some point, particularly as the playoffs approach. I think that'd be a fun time to kind of circle back and talk about who's in the playoffs at that higher level. And as you get further on, I will say I have done some streaming for like Onside Productions, which is they're both a company that does their own streams, but also they're often hired to do streams for like BAFA or BUCS or that sort of thing. And so as you get to the playoffs, a few more of the games actually are streamed in some fashion. So if your followers want to watch more American football, I would say you get to February, March time. That's the perfect time to tune in. The draft isn't there yet, and the playoffs and the Super Bowl are over, and whatever they're replacing the Pro Bowl with is in the rearview mirror. So come on over and watch some Brit Ball.
Absolutely. And we will share that, and definitely let us know. And I think it'll be a fun time to have you guys back to talk about it as we head towards that. I do remember that because the British season only started recently, relatively, and now they end. And as you said, after all, the pro football here and the college football here is finished. Well, Tom, you wanted to add something?
To be honest, I accidentally putting my mic on, but no, thank you very much for the invite. We've really enjoyed. I'll say that speak for myself, but Sean's of the same opinion. Really enjoyed speaking. You get us in a room, we can talk about British American football for hours. So we've done well to keep that to an hour and a quarter. But yeah, we'd very much like to be back whenever you'd like us.
Definitely, we'll plan on that. Well, that's all we have for today. On behalf of myself, Bob Aghayeri, this was our CFB Talk 107. We were talking British college football with Sean Endicott and Tom Snee. We appreciate all of you who stuck around and listened, and I just wanted to say thanks to all of you. Now, I'm going to hang up and listen.